the level appropriate to the degree. And I think we all came up with some really good examples of how we could do that in either medical programs or educational counseling. So at this point, what I'd like to do is, let's see where my slides will take us. I want to share with you that we discussed that in addition to those expectations of our program, there are degree standards that exist. And what I would suggest to you is that you research to determine if there are degree standards that are here in the country, or if there are degree standards that are unique to your degree programs. Some accrediting bodies specify them quite specifically. Here are the standards. In American higher education, we have a degree qualifications profile that helps us differentiate college-level coursework from high school-level coursework. And it's sort of a accepted practice that college-educated people in the U.S. have specialized knowledge in their field, broad and integrative knowledge. They possess intellectual skills, critical thinking, problem solving, etc. That they are engaged in applied and collaborative learning, and civic and global learning. So I would imagine ethics falls under that. And I can share with you the document that I think I might have mentioned that to you here. Maybe okay, so there's a document that was published for the use by universities by the Lumina Foundation on how we define degrees, a new direction for American higher education. It's by the Lumina Foundation. If you're interested in learning more about it, it's accessible. Just search Lumina Foundation Degree Qualification Profile. That's what I did not too long ago when it popped up. And to the point that was asked earlier about universities and their mission. So the idea is that there's associate degrees that go into certain depth and breadth of knowledge, and master's degrees go into certain depth and breadth of knowledge regarding these 5 outcome areas. And then master's degrees, of course, a little further out. So this is intended to illustrate that. But the other interesting illustration that I like about them is the acknowledgement that institutions may vary on their respective emphasis on any particular outcomes that help to sort of differentiate the institution. So in this case, every institution supports all 5 of the areas of learning. But you can see by the 3 different types of institutions here, they place different emphasis on each of the areas of learning. Okay? So our institutions can be unique and distinctive, and at the same time cover each of the areas. I think that's an illustration of a point we made earlier today. The other thing I wanted to share with you is, probably don't want to do this just yet. Bear with me for one moment. This illustration is in your handout materials, and it's an important illustration. We're going to play with it a little bit. And what I said to you is the learning outcomes are sort of central to the activity that we're engaged in, and it's our faculty that have to determine that. Well, I like this model. Actually, one of my faculty members came up with it, and she said, I need a way to understand how all the things feed into our learning outcomes at the program level, and how our program outcomes inform the actual design of our courses. And so she came up with, Dr. Patrizzo, this model, and I think it does reflect sort of the building blocks of learning outcomes, and then how learning outcomes at the program level are in service to what you do in the classroom, how you design the classroom experience. So in this example, we have an example of nursing. The nursing faculty have said that they want to make sure that we cover outcomes that support our accreditation and our mission of our institution, and any type of regulatory requirements of our Department of Education, and then input from our advisory boards, right? The nursing set. And that's sort of foundation. Then they said, well, then there are standards of the profession, the nursing organizations. In this case, we have a nursing accreditation through an organization called CCNE. But what they did was they identified the standards of the nursing profession, and then they made sure that the outcomes that they developed for the program reflect those standards. Okay, so accreditation, broader, and then the standards. And then they developed the program outcomes. I can show you an illustration of what they've done with the program outcomes here in a minute. And then the program outcomes, given the specificity of them, as expressions of what your learner should know and be able to do, they guide the kind of learning experiences you create, the kind of activities and assignments you give learners. And in our case, we want those activities and assignments to also be engaging. So we have that criteria on top of whatever it is. So what's an engaging way that we can have learners participate in some kind of activity that facilitates their learning? It's not just read, it's read and reflect. You know, write a reflection paper about what you read. You know, from that perspective, it's how do we engage them in the active learning process. And then assessment, which we're not going to talk about a lot right now, but it is how do we align our measures of whether students actually learn with the kinds of activities and assignments we provide them that give us a sense that they've achieved the learning outcome. It's a mouthful. If you were to create one of these pyramids that reflected the real standards that you need to consider for accreditation and regulatory and advisory boards, if you have them, standards of the profession, what would this look like? You don't have to deal with assignments or assessment right now. But if you take a couple outcomes of your programs, or if you think about your program, what would you put in this box, to inform your outcomes? This is more of an individual activity, but I would like for you to do it and then compare it with your colleagues at the table. So what are the things you would need to consider for your program? Here and here. The accreditation and the standards of the field. The specific organizations, etc. What would it look like? So let's take a few minutes, 5, 10 minutes. Oh, there's a question first. Yeah, you could draw that for yourself. Right? Again, I'm giving you activities that I think are very practical. If you are seeking or going through accreditation, to create these kinds of visuals and models to reflect your inputs are going to be really important. So hopefully it saves you time as you pursue accreditation. So what are the organization's standards you need to consider? Take about 10 minutes. Bigger. Yeah, so I think it's part of the ANA. I'm not quite sure. I know my chair of that program is on the ANA board. Just so that I can provide some additional clarity, what we're doing right now is you're taking your program in your college, and you're building the first two building blocks of this pyramid for that program, based on your perspective. And what are the accreditation bodies that you need to consider input from? There are regulatory bodies, ministries of education, etc., for a given program, or advisory boards that provide input. And then for that specific field, there's likely going to be some standards that are associated with that field. What are they? And all I want you to do is just write that in. You're replacing my pyramid boxes with your own for your program. We're just going to deal with the first two levels. We're not going to deal with outcomes at this point. You can't hear me? Just to fill this in. Right? This will list accreditation bodies and the standards that they are for them. Yeah. This one, the example here is in nursing. Nursing has to consider this. At the bottom. Yeah, yeah. It's standards.
Because I don't have the chart.
I know. It's on your sheet. It's on your handout. we can pull back together and talk about this if you're ready. This chart represents the flow of activities, to outcomes as sort of the central activity of what we're engaged in developing, to courses, to activities and assignments, and to ultimately to the ways we assess learners and evaluate learners. I will spend some time tomorrow talking about the difference between assessment and evaluation. What I really want to focus on here is how we arrive at program outcomes and to begin to show you the connection between the program outcomes and the courses. There has to be this sort of logical connection, and I'm going to help you make that connection. If you don't have that sort of clear in your mind at this time. So let me start out by suggesting a couple things to you. One, I want to recall what we said when we talked about accreditation. Okay, at the beginning of the session yesterday. We said that accreditation is a process that involves voluntary and cooperative efforts to move the higher education community toward three things: gathering information, reporting on it, and using evidence to improve teaching and learning. That's what accreditation primarily focuses on. We rely on peer review processes. That's accreditation. Getting the stamp of approval from your peers that you have a legitimate operation and that you're worthy to interact, connect with, relate to, transfer students, all those things. Agree on programming together. That's what accreditation enables us to do. Regulation tends to be different than accreditation. So in my country, we have regulators, and they tend to be governmental organizations or sort of representative of government organizations. In my country, the states regulate higher education for each of their own states. What I've experienced in my work as an international educator is that there are ministries of education that we have to seek approval through in order to operate or provide programs in that particular country. They regulate higher education by assuring that what we do protects consumers and is responsible in that way. They're not coming in to necessarily evaluate the quality of our programs and the teaching and learning process, but they do want to make sure that we're responsible citizens in the sort of education landscape. That's what the regulators do. I would imagine that nursing, not only does it have accreditation standards for nursing and standards for program accreditation, but there are probably ministries of education or ministries of health that also regulate nursing programs. So that's the sort of distinction there. What I'm asking you to consider is, or what I've asked you to consider is, what are the regulatory bodies, the accrediting bodies, and the professional associations that have standards for your respective programs, and to outline what those are, who those are, who they are. Does that make sense? Because then ultimately that becomes the input to your development of your program outcomes. Okay. So with that said, did you have a chance to do some of this work for your individual programs? I saw some people drawing on pyramids. Who are your major regulators and accreditors? You have them? Take some examples from different programs.
Our programs medicine, our the main accreditation body for us is the National Commission for Academic Accreditation and Assessment, Academic Accreditation and Assessment, and the regular body is the Institute of Higher Education. The advisory board
American Institution for Pharmacy Programs and Translation as one.
For the Saudi Arabia, we have the same NCAA works under the Ministry of Education, and for our computer science engineering, we have
ABEX.
Thank you. For nursing program, standard to be by Saudi Nurse Association and accreditation by NCAA, regulation by Ministry of Health, and advisory board by being the Dean of Nursing Faculties and the Directorate of Nursing Universities.
Sounds like you'll have a good handle on those two boxes. That's good. So that will be the building blocks for your program outcomes. Then, of course, you have your own expertise and the ideas of the faculty and colleagues at other institutions and their programs to compare and contrast your ideas to. But ultimately, the program outcomes, and I put up this slide that reflects cascading outcomes. And what I'm suggesting here is that program outcomes inform your course outcomes. And your course outcomes inform your assignment outcomes, the kinds of things you actually have students doing, their actions, their activities, your learning process, activities and assignments. It starts with the program outcomes. So how do you make this linkage between the program outcomes and the course outcomes? Well, I have a person, her name is Dr. Yaron Sweetland, and she's guided us to a way of thinking about this relationship in 3 ways. She says that for any program outcome, when you think about your courses, you're going to introduce that outcome somewhere in that curriculum. You're going to reinforce it somewhere in the curriculum. If you're smart, you're going to reinforce it multiple times. And then you're going to assess it somewhere in that curriculum. So she came up with a model for us. I don't know where she came up with. Maybe there's a conference of people who focus on assessment, but and they discuss these sort of matters. But it's been very helpful for us, and we've used it as a guide for every one of our programs. So the idea is that we list our program outcomes, we list our courses. The program outcomes on the top of a matrix, as you can imagine. List our courses down here on the x-axis, and then we say, where in our program, where in our courses do we introduce this outcome? Where do we reinforce it? And where do we assess it? I will illustrate that for you. I think it's a very useful tool. And anybody who comes in as a peer reviewer who sees that says it's covered. We don't need to ask a lot of questions. We see that we put a lot of thought into this, and we know how we're addressing our learning outcomes, our program outcomes in our curriculum. And so, if I might go to the presentation and share with you our academic bulletin. So here's our nursing, this is the chair of our nursing program. She has all the credentials in the world. She serves on one of those national boards of nursing. She was an inaugural class of the Fellows of the Academy of Nursing Education. She's on the National League for Nursing Board of Governors. This is her thing. She's real good in this nursing area. And so she has a really solid program. And in the academic bulletin for nursing, well, that's healthcare management. Let me go to nursing. You can see this for healthcare management as well. I'll shift over to nursing in a minute. But in this illustration, I have what's called an outcomes map. Okay? Let's blow it up here. outcomes of the program has 8 outcomes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And they're listed over here. Graduates of the healthcare management program will be able to integrate appropriate theories, principles, recommend patient-centered strategies, appraise leadership, distinguish the unique human resources, technical skills. You see that these are the outcomes of the program. They're reflected by number in this chart. And then the program has program-specific courses, in addition to a host of other courses and electives that students may take. But the core program courses are listed here. From Healthcare 300, and the description of these courses are also down here somewhere. I can show you the description. But what you see is that the learning outcome map serves as a roadmap to help guide students' progress through their program of study. It shows where each program outcome is introduced, reinforced, and assessed within the program curriculum. Follow me? So, in the first course, which is probably the 300 level course, a number of outcomes are introduced in that course. And you can see that outcome number 1 is introduced in a couple different courses. Outcome number 1 is introduced in the first 2 courses. It's reinforced in Healthcare 422 and Healthcare 444. And it's assessed in Healthcare Management 495. That's where we do the assessment. So something you can learn already from this chart is you don't assess the program outcomes in every course. That would be very expensive as well. But in this case, the program chair for healthcare management decided to assess all of the learning outcomes in this 495 capstone course. So there are artifacts that are being pulled from that course to determine if the students are achieving mastery in the program learning outcomes. Now, in every course, we're evaluating students. We're giving them grades on assignments and that sort of thing. We're not talking about student evaluation. We're talking about program outcome assessment, where the students are satisfying the outcomes of the program as a whole.
So,
Yes, comment or question?
Is it similar or same as the blueprint of the course?
This is practically your roadmap for the program. That you have these courses that are necessary to satisfy the program outcomes, and they're necessary to satisfy the programs because you can point to the relationship of each of the courses to the program outcomes. I didn't hear the question.
Asking about the revision
Okay, I'm going to go back to the abbreviations in the map reflect the grid up at the top. I means introduced. R means reinforced. A means assessed. That's where the program outcome is introduced, where it is reinforced, and where it's assessed. So it just sort of creates an easy visual to see that for us. And you know, the patterns of this activity differs by program. Let's go ahead to look at a few other programs. So human resource management has fewer program outcomes and fewer major area courses as part of their program. And it's largely because they all have to take the business core courses as well. To study in the College of Business, HR is in the College of Business, they have to take all the business classes, and then they take the HR courses. Right? And you can see that this program chair decided to assess all their outcomes at the capstone course level as well. information systems audit. Every program has an outcome map. This particular information technology major, they assess at different points in the curriculum. But you can see the outcomes are expressed on the side. Here's your outcome map. I wanted to look at nursing because we've been focused on nursing. Nursing. This nursing dean, the nursing chair, actually assesses her curriculum in most of her courses. She engages in assessment. So just a different strategy. I'm imagining she probably puts a lot more time into assessment. And I would also suspect that there isn't a strong prerequisite architecture to these courses. Because if you had that, you could do more assessment near the end of the program, if the courses build on one another. But in this instance, she has assessment all over her courses. And she has 9 outcomes, program outcomes, which it's more likely that you'll have more outcomes if you have more regulatory bodies that are prescribing what you need to teach or what students need to learn. Any questions about this? Showing the connection between your program outcomes and your course outcomes. Should we take a hypothetical situation here? Perhaps from one of your majors, or I can give you a particular major. I'm really interested in what's happening with energy management and energy studies. Things that relate to environmental sustainability, but also have to do with what we know about energy sources, energy pricing, all that. So I'll give you the option to either select a program at your discretion, or choose energy studies as a bachelor's degree program that you can consider. But what I'd like for you to do is try your hand at coming up with outcomes for energy studies and really see if you can come up with a little bit of a grid. If these are the program outcomes for energy studies, what kind of courses might you need? Or if these are the outcomes for the program you select, what kind of courses might you need? And how would you link the course to the program? Right? Where would content maybe be introduced? Where might it be reinforced? Where might it be assessed? We're going to need a little time on this activity. So I'm going to say, let's try about 15 to 20 minutes. We're looking at program outcomes for a program that you either select or the one that I'm providing, energy studies. Kind of courses you might offer. Outcomes and courses. And tell me about where you might introduce and reinforce it. I'll leave this chart up and blow it up so you have a better view of it. Actually, let me go to a simpler one. Healthcare management. She's got too many outcomes. Here's an example. So I'm leaving an example of outcomes up on the screen for a program. We have our outcomes grid, program outcomes, type of courses you might offer, and your outcomes map. Okay. Go ahead and take about 15, 20 minutes. I'll check in with you, see if you have any questions. Are there any questions from the women's side? What's interesting about this program, information technology program, completion a lot of courses. another program, because this is an academic program. It's not even an academic program. We're not there yet. We're in the process. Okay, let's pull back together on this one. I'm curious to know what you were discussing. I have to tell you that the first time the members of my faculty engaged in this activity, it led to some incredible discoveries. You know, the faculty members expressed some important values around certain courses, but at times they wouldn't see that the program outcome was covered but in one area, and it was introduced but never reinforced, and they weren't assessing it. So it started to show a picture. We call it formative assessment. You're engaged in planning, and you want to assure that your program outcomes are covered sufficiently in your program, right? And this is sort of a quick glance to show you where are we introducing the outcomes and content related to it, where are we reinforcing that content, and where are we assessing it. And you can see at times, if you do this activity, that perhaps there is an outcome that may not even be introduced in your program, but it's expressed as an outcome. That will be a problem. We want to make sure that you cover content and assessment activities related to that outcome. But it also may be true that you have introduced a lot of content, but that you never reinforce it, and then by the time students get toward the end of a program, and you don't see the outcome being introduced. Look at computer science, outcome number 3. Communicate appropriately for technical and expert audiences. I don't see that outcome being introduced in here. Maybe it's down low. Or maybe they're expecting that that takes place in courses outside of their major. But I personally, and that they're assessing it here, I personally would like to see that outcome introduced somewhere and reinforced prior to us assessing it. And I can just see that from this program, but maybe I'm missing something. That caught my eye pretty quick. Oh, there we go. So in this class, MIS 320, they're introducing it, reinforcing it, and assessing it. But is that enough? When I go back home to my campus, I'm going to meet with this group and say, come on guys, is this enough? I just discovered this. I'm going to ask that question. Now, let's take a look at what that MIS 320 class is. I'm just kind of curious. So we go over to the course study, MIS 320. Maybe it's on the next page. Nope, I passed it. Computer science, MIS 320 is not listed here among the courses. Oh, there it is, okay. So let's zoom in there. Okay, there we go. MIS 320. So it is a technical communications course. So it would make sense that for that communications outcome, that they would introduce it, reinforce it, and assess it in a course that's dedicated toward to technical communication. See that? But I still would like to see that in other classes. So this becomes a really effective tool for me to examine pretty quickly what's happening in the curriculum, where we're introducing outcomes, where we're reinforcing it, where we're assessing it. Let me ask you, was this an easy activity for you to do? How did this work out for you? I saw some folks working on this.
Should I just tell you what we have learned from
Pardon me?
what our experience in doing it, or telling you what happened?
Yeah, both.
It's a lot, but I think we not actually. But I just want to remind my colleagues with how constant we came with the biggest thing.
Okay.
We came with 9 hours.
Okay.
Okay? And I just want to spell out a bit 5 or 6 and show how we did this.
Yes.
For example, our first outcome was ability of the student to take history competition. Our second outcome is our student ability to perform a physical examination.
Okay.
Our third outcome is our student ability to investigate the nations.
Okay.
Let's say our fifth outcome is to communicate with the nations. And our sixth outcome is, for example, to apply the basic sciences to the clinical. So this is our program.
Okay.
As far as the courses are concerned, we have a course which is called History Taking Module. So it's a course which deals with history taking. Okay. If you want to blueprint it in the math, we will say that this course will introduce the concept of history taking to the student. So it will be I for 1 there.
Gotcha. Okay, very good.
We have a physical examination course or module which will introduce the concept of physical examination. So it will be I for that number 2. For lab investigation course, we have a course designed for lab investigation, which will introduce the concept of investigating a patient. So I for this particular number 3. We have a course which is called medical reasoning course, which will introduce the concept of communication with the patient. So it will be I for number 5.
Now, would you, let's take that, let me borrow this for a second. So you take the medical reasoning course as an example. In order for someone to communicate with the patient, wouldn't they also have to interact with the charts again from the previous courses? Wouldn't that serve as input into that
Absolutely.
process? So in that sense, you're probably also putting an R
Yes.
under the first outcome to say that we're reinforcing that you have to interact with this chart. Do you see what I mean?
Yes, absolutely. You're absolutely right. So when we came to a course called Terminology and Association, for example, this will reinforce the history taking, will reinforce the physical examination, will reinforce the practical procedures, will reinforce the investigation, but it will introduce a concept of, for example, the demonstration of ethical approach. For example.
Yes, yes.
So this is how we know it. I mean, are we alive? Are we on the right track?
You're absolutely on the right track. You know, this is one of the best practices today. If you go out on ABET's webpage, there's a similar chart, isn't there, for computer science and engineering programs, where there is outcome or knowledge domain areas. And maybe tell me a little bit about the ABET chart. What is ABET? Tell us what ABET is.
ABET is an accreditation agency for the computer science and engineering programs, and it also accredits information technology and information system programs. It actually recommends when you make any program or design any program, you should have these knowledge areas, right? So, 4 computer science knowledge areas, mathematics areas, and so based on that, let's see how many credit hours one bachelor program should have, right? And what percentage of the 4 areas of subject that bachelor program should contain. Then it actually expect from the colleges to offer the courses which cover those knowledge areas according to every requirement of the person. So outcomes, program outcomes are basically derived from those knowledge areas, right? And similarly, post outcomes also from those knowledge areas. So broader knowledge areas and the narrow knowledge areas, and then we have a similar type of metric which we fill in, and then we say, okay, as long as the syllabus is concerned, so this actually qualifies as the need of the case.
Yes, it did. Just another example, there is no perfect way to do this. It can vary. And if your accrediting body already has sort of format that you can use for this, I would suggest that you consider using it in your field. Because ultimately, if you're seeking accreditation, you're going to have to be accountable for it. So if you can illustrate that this is the map that we have to assure that we're covering the content areas and the learning outcomes that are prescribed by our accrediting body, in some way that also illustrates your connection of that coverage to how you are introducing the content, reinforcing it, and assessing it, that will be a really powerful way for you to check off. I mean, that's a big focus area for these businesses. Show me how you are addressing your outcomes in the curriculum. This is a real way that you can do that. Now, there are many ways you can do it. I heard one over here. I want you to talk a moment about the content domain areas as well, because that's another sort of level of this. If you sort of break it out by Bloom's domain areas, effective, intellectual skills. You can tell me more about it.
Regarding the pharmacy program, we wrote some outcomes for the program, including patient care, understand the diagnosis, sharing the pharmacological prescription, understood clinical pharmacokinetics, and drug-drug interaction. These learning outcomes of the program can achieve by number of courses
We wrote some courses there, physiology, biochemistry, pharmacology, medicinal chemistry, and clinical pharmacokinetics, pharmacotherapeutics. And we match between the courses and the learning outcomes, how to be achieved by this course. One more, we can add how this learning outcomes assisted by oral examination or written examination, lab examination, methods of assessment for each learning outcome. Also, we can add to which domain this learning outcomes, like this knowledge or skills or communication or psychomotor skills.
So there are, best practices, and there are even better practices if you wanted to enrich that. I could certainly describe our assessment methods in a chart. Our faculty chose to keep this simple and then have another document that's program related where they describe their methods of assessment in the other document, right? And you could certainly organize your learning outcomes by domain area, as been mentioned. And when we get into courses, I think we start into courses tomorrow. We can talk more about domain areas, we can talk more about Bloom's taxonomy, and you can decide how you might use that as you present your case for accreditation. But it's essential for curriculum development. So today, we were just simply making the connection between program and courses. Program outcomes have to be covered somewhere, and we have to make the connection to the courses. And it helps when you can show not only a checkbox, but something like a key that says we introduce the content here, we reinforce it, and we assess it. It adds a little bit more weight to it than just simply putting a check there. Because then you can quickly look and say, all right, are we introducing the content properly in the right places? Are we reinforcing it? And have we built in a proper assessment for that content area? Now I'm going to go back to our main presentation for a moment. We talked about program outcomes cascading to course outcomes. We have not done course outcomes yet. We're going to do that starting tomorrow. But we have made the connection of programs to courses, course content. Now, program outcomes, as we've said, they have to identify the broader needs of society, which include accreditation bodies, regulatory bodies, the institution itself, and then your program-specific bodies have to be accounted for as well. So we have degree standards and professional standards. It's best when we can work across our units, our academic units, whether it's a department or a college, to come to some consensus on these program outcomes. So that's a conclusion. In mapping outcomes of programs, I believe it's important to illustrate. This is an opinion, but it's backed by really good practice in higher education today. Where are you introducing these outcomes, these program outcomes in terms of the content? Where are you reinforcing it, and where are you assessing it? You could probably get away with checkboxes. That's acceptable if you're doing the assessment. But this shows the straight relationship between the programs and the courses and your assessment activity. So I would recommend this as a best practice. When we get into course outcomes, we'll get into Bloom's taxonomy. Here's a little bit more of a further description of the introduce concept. It's introduced for the first time at a lower level in a course. Reinforcement concept is reinforced through higher level learning activities and assessments. And then through assessment, we have evidence of learning that is measured at the program level. I think what I will do to start out tomorrow is differentiate for you this concept of student evaluation, which can be defined as valuing the performance of the learner, the student. We do this through grades and assessments that we assign numbers and letters to the performance. And it's our expert judgment or some objective basis that we do that. And differentiating that from assessment that relies on a lot of the same tools, but we're really aggregating information. We're aggregating it across the student population, and we're comparing it to the program outcome, not the outcomes of the assignment itself, the outcomes of the program. And I'll tell you why we differentiate these two and how they're both useful to us as educators. And we do our stuff. Let me stop here and see if there are any questions for me. If there aren't any questions, that concludes our session for today. Appreciate your time and effort. Thank you. Pardon me? Wait a second.
According to that.
Assess.
Anyway, okay. Question. I mean, the evidence of learning is measured at the program level is needed for all aspects, not only in one outcome. I mean, if you see the definition, evidence when
So,
should be
the accrediting bodies, I'm sorry, I'll answer this question before we finish. The accrediting bodies for ABET, they're looking at program level outcomes assessment. So we have course learning outcomes assessment that we do for our course outcomes evaluation, really, on students. And there are artifacts that we identify in our program that are represented by the A's in the boxes in the grid. And we identify specific artifacts that give us information on student learning as it relates to the program outcomes. That's what ABET's concerned with. To what extent your students satisfy the learning outcomes for the program, computer science, information technology, etc. So we have to determine whether there are artifacts that enable us to measure the program outcome. And that's what we're concerned about here. When we talk about program outcomes, we're talking about program outcome assessment. Right? So we'll start there next time, because then I'll just give you a sense of what's happening in courses, how are we evaluating learners, and then when do we decide that we need to pull an artifact from a course for the purposes of program outcome assessment. All right. Well, if there aren't any other questions, let's conclude our session today. We'll start up again tomorrow morning. Thank you. Oh my goodness, look at this. Picture of me. Is it you? Give me a little bit more money in my pocket. Thank you. Yes, but they're serving them in many different ways. They're serving them to introduce concepts, to reinforce them, but not all serve to assess, for assessment purposes. So we have to decide where in the program we actually assess learning. So students may work on projects throughout a program related to a learning outcome, but it doesn't build to a crescendo until the last course, where they're expected to pull it all together. Maybe that's the artifact we pull for assessment as it relates to the program. So,
It's very interesting, but sometimes the concepts are difficult to understand.
I'm going to work with, we're going to work through this. I don't want to leave you confused.
Well, it's still confused with the assessment.
Assessment is when we pull artifacts that have already, many times they've already been graded. They've been graded for the assignment purposes.
No, you see what is my confused came from. When we have the course, okay, it is I or R, okay, but should be also, there should be an evidence of learning. Should be always there, present.
Yes,
That's what I understand.
I agree. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you're doing a program outcome assessment.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Because you remember,
Yeah, I understand. Okay.
because of this, your evidence of learning might be related to the assignment outcome.
Yeah.
And the evidence made of learning might even be related to a course outcome. But for the program outcome, it might encompass a lot of activity.
Yeah. There should be in other place and as the assessment. Yeah.
All right, thank
This
you.
is a complete-